Why is Tyler Perry selling the $14 million mansion that once sheltered Prince Harry and Meghan Markle? And what secret debt bomb is about to explode behind closed Montecito gates? That's not just a juicy headline. It's a question that cracks open a mystery far deeper than luxury real estate. Before we continue, please hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and turn on the notification bell for updates. Because when one of Hollywood's most powerful media moguls suddenly puts a prized property on the market, a property tied directly to the most controversial royal couple in modern history, you'd be right to wonder, is this just business, or is this a silent betrayal? And more importantly, why now? Let's rewind, just for a second. In 2020, the world was at a standstill. COVID had shut down borders, airports, and cities. But while most people were binge-watching Tiger King and learning to bake banana bread, something far more dramatic was happening behind the walls of a $14 million Mediterranean-style estate nestled in the hills of Montecito. Prince Harry and Meghan Markle, fresh off their dramatic royal exit, had nowhere to go. They were newly exiled, newly free, and entirely without a permanent residence. And then, like a twist from one of his movies, Tyler Perry swept in like a guardian angel. He offered them a mansion, but not just any mansion. This was one of his most private, most secure, most prized estates. And now, he's putting it on the market. Ask yourself, why would a man who offered sanctuary, protection, and silence suddenly wash his hands of the very place that helped launch Meghan and Harry's post-royal brand? And just as headlines explode about their financial mismanagement, lost multi-million-dollar contracts, and alleged private debts, there's more to this story. A lot more. And what you're about to hear may completely flip what you thought you knew about Tyler Perry's generosity and the true cost of befriending royalty. A house built on secrets. Here's what most people don't know. Tyler Perry didn't just offer a spare guest room. He opened his most secure, exclusive, secluded property to two people embroiled in an international media war. And he didn't stop there. He provided security, transport, media coaching, and allegedly even public relations strategy sessions, all in total silence. For a while, it worked. The Oprah interview was staged from their newfound California base. They projected serenity, control, and rebirth. But privately, things were unraveling. According to multiple entertainment insiders, the Sussexes' relationship with Perry was far more transactional than most realize. Whispers suggest that Perry's team initially believed this was a short-term stay, a few months of refuge. But months became longer, and bills reportedly started to pile up. At first, Perry didn't blink. After all, his empire, built on blockbuster plays, films, and television, had made him a billionaire. What was a few million in rent or security detail? But by the end of 2021, that patience had worn thin. Insiders allege there were disagreements about use of staff, violations of verbal agreements, and, perhaps most explosively, unpaid commitments. And here's where it gets messy, the hidden costs of royal proximity. Everyone assumes Prince Harry and Meghan are rolling in money. They signed multi-million-dollar deals, right? Spotify, Netflix, Penguin Random House, the works. But what happens when those deals don't deliver? What happens when shows are canceled, podcasts are ghosted, and viewer numbers don't meet expectations? What happens when the brand, the Sussex brand, starts to lose its shine? Well, you start missing payments. Sources suggest that some of the help Harry and Meghan received came with private clauses, informal agreements promising reimbursement or future compensation once their new ventures gain traction. But here's the bombshell. There's mounting evidence that some of those promises were never fulfilled. That's right. Tyler Perry, generous, discreet, and fiercely protective, might have ended up footing more of the bill than anyone ever imagined. And the resentment, sources say, quietly grew. The mansion's timeline. Let's be clear about something. This wasn't a fluke. Tyler Perry didn't just randomly decide to list the mansion. This wasn't a market's hot, let's make a deal kind of moment. This is strategic, calculated. Because behind the smiling photos, the hand-holding red carpets, and the photo ops of chickens in the backyard, there was tension. The moment the Sussexes moved out of Perry's home and into their own $14 million Montecito estate, something changed. Perry stopped publicly commenting on them. Mentions dwindled. Invitations dried up. The guardian angel was quietly stepping back. Now, with the mansion back on the market, real estate insiders are raising eyebrows. Not just because of the price tag, but because of what it means. It means Perry is closing a chapter. He's cutting ties. And he's doing it loudly, on paper, on listings, and across the gossip columns. Why now? Timing matters. Let's zoom in. In the last 12 months alone, Spotify terminated their $20 million deal with the Sussexes. Netflix reportedly considered shelving future Sussex-related projects due to low performance. Archwell, their nonprofit, is under scrutiny for its murky spending and dwindling partnerships. And King Charles made moves that further distanced Harry from royal finances. All of this is happening as Perry lists the property. Coincidence? Maybe. But in Hollywood, and in royal drama, nothing is ever just coincidence. The unspoken conversation. Here's something else that's slipped under the radar. Tyler Perry has never publicly clarified whether Meghan and Harry paid for their stay. Sure, the tabloids speculated. But Perry? Silent. And silence, in the world of billion-dollar brands, is rarely empty. What if his silence wasn't about privacy, but about reputation? What if there was an understanding, one that never went public, but one that didn't end well? There are rumors, still unconfirmed but persistent, that Perry's team sent private legal correspondence to the Sussexes in early 2023. Something about misrepresentation, use of footage, lack of credit. Nothing has ever been published, but the whispers persist. And now the mansion's up for grabs. Make of that what you will. Symbolic fallout. This sale isn't just about property. It's about power, about image, about control. Because for Tyler Perry, who built an empire on controlling his image and protecting his circle, this sale is a statement. I'm moving on. And for Harry and Meghan, it could be a very public unraveling of their support system. What happens when the people who once protected you start backing away? What happens when the safe houses become for sale signs? What happens when the money runs out? So, why does this matter now? Because this isn't just celebrity gossip. This is the story of how empires collapse, not from enemies, but from within. It's about friendship strained by finance, trust shattered by publicity, and deals broken by ego. The Sussexes were once the most talked about couple in the world. But behind the headlines and Netflix specials, a storm was brewing. And now? It's reaching the surface. This mansion sale is the tip of the iceberg. Because what comes next involves contracts, phone calls, reputations, and a private conversation that could flip the entire narrative. You see, this wasn't the only property Harry and Meghan had ties to. There's another location, another name, another betrayal. And the moment it leaked, everything began to crumble. Could a single house become both a sanctuary and a ticking time bomb? Let's go back to the beginning. Before the headlines, before the documentaries, before the Megxit label exploded into global consciousness. Because long before the $14 million Montecito home was put up for sale, before Prince Harry and Meghan Markle stepped onto Oprah's patio for that explosive interview, before royal aides fumbled with PR disasters in Buckingham Palace corridors, there was a quiet arrival. No fanfare, no press release. Just two exiled royals slipping into the shadows of Los Angeles in the middle of a pandemic, with no home, no title, and, at least publicly, no plan. And then, Tyler Perry stepped in. But was it generosity? Or was it strategy? That mansion wasn't just a mansion. It was ground zero for the rebranding of a royal couple. A house like no other. The Mediterranean-style estate looms over the hills of Montecito like a modern fortress. Wrought iron gates. A private driveway long enough to land a small jet. Imported stone from Spain. 10 bedrooms. A home theater. A sprawling guest house. A security system so tight, even drones got blocked. Perry never listed this property publicly. This wasn't a vacation house. It was a strategic hideaway. Used occasionally. Mentioned rarely. Known only by a very select few. So how did Meghan and Harry end up there? It wasn't through a real estate agent. It wasn't through a royal connection. It was through Oprah. Yes, that Oprah. She made the call. She made the introduction. And Tyler said yes. But insiders say even Perry didn't realize what he'd just agreed to. Because he didn't just offer a place to stay, he offered his reputation, his privacy, his empire. And slowly, the mansion became more than shelter. It became headquarters, the birthplace of the brand. Think about it. When Harry and Meghan first left the UK, their public image was a mess. Tabloids branded them as selfish, unpatriotic, whiny. They needed a reset, and Perry's mansion became the stage. The couple was photographed more in Montecito than in LA, but their earliest press team activity started in Perry's home. Phone calls, crisis PR, Zoom interviews. Even the early filming logistics for the Oprah special, those were coordinated inside those very walls. According to a now former Archwell contractor, Perry's estate served as a de facto war room for the Sussex's media operation during 2020. It had the space, the security, and most importantly, the silence. No leaks, no staff talking to the press, no paparazzi photos from Perry's gates. It was the perfect cocoon. But here's the contradiction no one wants to talk about. As the couple publicly declared their need for privacy and healing, behind those iron gates, they were orchestrating the most strategic brand pivot in royal history. And every single moment of it was rooted in one place: Tyler Perry's Montecito estate. A royal refuge, or a royal mistake. Perry, known for his ironclad control over his productions, was suddenly housing two of the most scrutinized people on earth. At first, it seemed like a perfect match. Meghan's love of storytelling, Harry's need to reshape his image, Perry's reputation as a Hollywood kingmaker. But there were rumblings. People close to Perry's team started noticing changes. First, the guest list. A few select visitors, including stylists, brand consultants, and lawyers, were seen arriving through the back entrance. Then came the increased security demands. Not from Perry's team, from Harry's. Private details were changed. Schedules shifted. Even Perry's own staff were reportedly asked to sign new NDAs when Meghan and Harry moved in. And then came the transformation of one of the mansion's wings into what a source called a strategy suite. Whiteboards, schedules, video call setups. Perry's home had become an operations center. And Perry? He wasn't thrilled. Tensions behind closed doors. It's one thing to offer sanctuary. It's another thing when that sanctuary becomes a media bunker. A staffer, speaking under anonymity, claimed that a senior member of Perry's team raised concerns just 2 months into the Sussex's stay. The concern? That the property was being used beyond the original scope of hospitality. There was no formal lease. There was no agreed-upon end date. Just an open-ended understanding that was becoming increasingly strained. Tyler wanted to help, the insider said. But he didn't sign up for a public relations war from his own living room. But still, Perry stayed silent. Because that's what power players do. Until something happened, that changed the temperature. The Oprah interview. Turning point or breaking point. March 7, 2021. The date that sent shockwaves through the British monarchy and the world. The Oprah interview aired. Explosive claims. Accusations of racism. Mental health crises. Security revocation. And one quiet but critical detail that many missed. The Sussexes confirmed they had stayed at a friend's mansion during their transition. That friend was Perry. Publicly, it seemed like a kind gesture being acknowledged. But behind the scenes, Perry's phone began lighting up. Producers, friends, royal insiders, even members of the press. They all wanted to know, why did you get involved? Were you paid? Are you part of the Netflix deal? And the answer, reportedly, was always the same. No, I was just helping. But according to 2 separate sources, one from the entertainment industry and another close to Perry's charitable foundation, that night marked a shift. Perry realized his name was now entangled in something far more dangerous than a real estate arrangement. He was now part of the Sussex narrative, and he wasn't sure he wanted to be. The unofficial lease that never ended. Let's get practical for a moment. Most celebrities don't move into homes without some form of paperwork. Even amongst friends, there are contracts, agreements, clear lines. But in the case of Meghan and Harry, insiders say it was all handshake diplomacy, a verbal understanding, some whispered expectations, and a private conversation Perry assumed would be honored. But as the months dragged on, and as Archwell ballooned into a media machine, people close to Perry's circle began asking the obvious question. Were Harry and Meghan taking advantage? It's not an accusation. It's a question. One that gets whispered in quiet kitchens and private dinner parties in Beverly Hills. What started as refuge was beginning to feel like an occupation. And still, Perry remained quiet. Until something snapped. The snap nobody saw coming. Here's where things get murky. In mid-2021, shortly after the birth of Lilibet, a document was allegedly sent to Perry's legal team. What was in that document? No one knows for sure, but the timing lines up with a rapid internal shift. Perry moved several longtime staff members off the Montecito property. He began rejecting media inquiries related to Meghan and Harry, even ones from friendly outlets. And he quietly stopped mentioning their names in interviews. The silence was screaming. And now, the mansion, once their shelter, their base, their war room, is for sale. Gone. Listed. Done. So ask yourself, was this all just a favor gone too far? Or was it something deeper? Did Perry regret opening his doors? Or did Harry and Meghan, perhaps unintentionally, burn yet another bridge? Because sources say, he didn't just remove them from his property. He erased the entire experience from his portfolio. Photos removed. Footage deleted. Mentions purged. Like it never happened. What happens when royalty runs out of royal cash? It's a question nobody wanted to ask, and everyone in Hollywood is now whispering. Because if you thought Prince Harry and Meghan Markle had it made, living in a $14 million Montecito estate, rubbing shoulders with Oprah, inking multi-million-dollar deals with Spotify and Netflix, you wouldn't be alone. That's the fantasy. But behind the scenes, things were falling apart faster than anyone could imagine. And when Tyler Perry decided to put his Montecito mansion on the market, insiders say it wasn't just about reclaiming property. It was about cutting ties with a brand that's become toxic, erratic, and dangerously close to broke. This chapter isn't about rumors. It's about receipts. Unpaid ones. Let's pull back the curtain. From rags to riches to reality check. After the royal exit in 2020, the Sussexes were in high demand. Everyone wanted a piece of the couple that had defied Buckingham Palace. Media outlets were salivating. Production companies were pitching. Book agents were circling. And within months, the deals came flooding in. Spotify, a reported $20 million to produce a podcast series. Netflix, an alleged $100 million to create original content. Penguin Random House, a mega-book deal that included Harry's bombshell memoir Spare. It was the stuff of dreams. Until those dreams began to dry up. Spotify, the silent implosion. Let's start with the most obvious flop, Archetypes. Meghan's Spotify-exclusive podcast launched with major fanfare. It was supposed to break down societal labels placed on women. The branding was sharp. The guest list? Star-studded. But the problems started almost immediately. Episodes dropped sporadically. Critics said Meghan's voiceovers sounded overproduced, detached, even artificial. Guests, while big names, often felt mismatched or underused. And then, the numbers came in. According to an internal leak, the engagement wasn't just underwhelming, it was abysmal. In mid-2023, Spotify announced the deal had been terminated. Executives made cryptic but damning comments, including one reportedly saying, "We didn't get content. We got chaos." The company took a hit. But Meghan and Harry? They lost credibility. And worse, they didn't receive the full payout. Insiders claim that Spotify clawed back millions in unused funds, and that the Sussexes had already spent a large portion expecting the deal to last longer. Suddenly, the cash pipeline dried up. And the bills? Still coming in. Netflix. Big promise, bigger problem. Then came Netflix. It was their flagship deal. Their shining opportunity to prove they were more than royal rebels. They were creators. But after the Harry and Meghan docuseries dropped, the problems began. The 6-part series, while initially buzzy, failed to maintain viewership beyond the first week. Netflix was hoping for a cultural phenomenon. They got a PR headache. Critics questioned the couple's motivations. Viewers grew weary of the us versus them narrative. Even fans began to ask, are they ever going to move on? Internally, Netflix reportedly grew frustrated. Their follow-up projects, like Pearl, an animated series Meghan was developing, were canceled before they even launched. Netflix had invested tens of millions into development, planning, and infrastructure for Sussex-led content. And with only one major project delivered, that's not a return. That's a risk. And Netflix doesn't like risk. There are now whispers that the streamer is considering ending the partnership altogether. Which leads to the question no one wants to say out loud. What happens when the $100 million deal never pays out in full? The book deal, short-term gain, long-term pain. Harry's memoir Spare sold millions of copies within weeks. It was raw, emotional, explosive. It also destroyed whatever remaining goodwill existed between him and the royal family. While the advance from Penguin Random House was hefty, reportedly between $20 to $30 million for multiple books, it wasn't all delivered up front. And after the backlash, sources suggest the publisher became nervous about future installments. Sales were strong, but reputation was fractured. And Meghan? She was allegedly not included in future book installments under the deal. No second memoir. No tell-all from her perspective, which meant another revenue stream, closed. Unpaid staff, quiet lawsuits, and Archewell woes. You may not have heard much about Archewell lately, and there's a reason. The couple's charitable foundation, once promoted as a platform for world-changing work, has become a ghost town. Multiple staff members have quietly exited. Projects have stalled. And in late 2024, a report surfaced claiming Archewell had paid more in executive salaries and administrative fees than it had distributed in grants. Translation? It looked more like a personal brand operation than a philanthropic machine. Some donors, frustrated by the lack of transparency, pulled back. And behind closed doors, 2 former contractors reportedly filed claims over unpaid invoices. Small claims, quiet filings, but enough to raise a red flag. Where was the money going? And more importantly, where was it coming from? Mounting costs, mounting pressure. Let's talk expenses. The Sussexes didn't move into a humble 2-bedroom. They bought a $14 million mansion with sprawling acreage, staff quarters, and a mortgage that could choke a prince. Security alone costs hundreds of thousands per year. Some estimate it tops $2 million annually when factoring private contractors, surveillance, armored transport, and contingency planning. Add in travel, staff, publicists, legal counsel for everything from copyright to royal disputes. Not to mention lifestyle costs, designer clothing, gourmet chefs, household maintenance. It adds up, fast. And with every drop deal, every clawback, every PR flop, that income flow shrinks. And the debts? Stay? Are they in the red? Here's the controversial claim that started circulating in private industry circles, that the Sussexes, despite their brand value, are asset-rich but cash-poor. Yes, they have equity in their Montecito home. Yes, they've earned millions in the past 3 years. But the liquidity, the actual spendable income, is much lower than expected. And Perry? He saw the numbers. Insiders say that part of the growing rift between Perry and the Sussexes wasn't personal, it was financial. He reportedly discovered that certain reimbursements he was promised, travel, security, staffing, were either delayed or never arrived. And when the Archewell payments stopped arriving on time, he pulled the plug. No confrontation, just a quiet "we're done." Which leads us to the most shocking part of all. A hidden lawsuit, buried deep. In a small LA legal filing, there's a case number that doesn't list Harry or Meghan by name. But the timeline, address, and representatives match exactly. The claim? Breach of verbal contract. The plaintiff? Redacted. But one entertainment attorney claims it's a shell firm that handles logistics for Perry Studios' private assets. If true, this would confirm that Perry didn't just feel burned. He may have formally sought damages. And if that's the case, it explains everything. Why he's selling the Montecito estate. Why he's removed mentions of the Sussexes from his projects. Why every appearance of friendship has disappeared. The end of the fairy tale. It was supposed to be the ultimate redemption story. Exiled royals rebuild their lives in sunny California, fueled by love, purpose, and billion-dollar deals. But the numbers don't lie. The deals failed. The bills grew. And the friendships fractured. Perry gave them a mansion. And in return, he got lawsuits, delays, reputational damage, and perhaps worst of all, silence. Not even a public thank you. Not even a line in the credits. So now he's speaking in the loudest way he knows how. He's selling the house. And to those who know him, it's not just a real estate transaction. It's a warning, a declaration, a chapter closed. But just when Perry thought he'd walked away, a new player entered the game. One that could drag everything back into the spotlight and expose secrets that Perry and the Sussexes hoped would stay buried forever. What if the biggest fallout wasn't personal, but contractual? Everyone loves to talk about betrayal, about broken trust, about drama. But what if the real fracture between Tyler Perry and the Sussexes wasn't born from emotional fallout, but from a single document? A clause, a promise, a private arrangement that was never supposed to be seen by the public and maybe never intended to be fulfilled. You see, it's easy to believe that the mansion Perry provided was just a friendly favor, a generous offer in a time of crisis. But this is Hollywood. Nothing is ever just a favor. And the truth? The Sussexes weren't just living there. They were contractually tied to it. And when Perry saw that clause being quietly ignored, that's when everything started to unravel. Because behind every fairy tale mansion is a file folder. And inside that folder was a ticking time bomb. The verbal agreement that became a paper trail. When Meghan and Harry landed in Los Angeles, they weren't carrying much. Just personal luggage, a security detail, and a ton of emotional baggage from the palace. Perry didn't require much. He's known to help friends, and he keeps his circle tight. But that didn't mean he acted blindly. According to two individuals familiar with the arrangement, Perry's legal team did prepare a simple use agreement. Not a lease, not a rental contract, but something in between, a hybrid document covering usage expectations, length of stay, and security obligations. And buried in that document, a clause. Small, unassuming, easily overlooked, but critical. It stated that Perry's hospitality was contingent on the Sussexes reimbursing certain expenses within a specified time frame after the conclusion of their stay. What kind of expenses? Think. Private security contractors, background check support for staff, upkeep and maintenance costs related to extended occupancy, travel coordination for secure deliveries, and personnel. Nothing out of the ordinary for high-profile guests. But Perry's team didn't draft that clause for nothing. They included it because they expected it to be honored. What happened after the Sussexes moved out? When Meghan and Harry eventually moved into their own Montecito mansion, the public thought it was the natural next step. Settling in, they said, putting down roots. What no one realized, the clock had started ticking. According to sources, Perry's team reached out shortly after their departure. Polite, formal, routine. They simply requested a breakdown of the agreed reimbursements. Nothing unusual, but there was no reply. Then came another message. This one less polite. Still silence. And that's when Perry's tone changed. Because Perry doesn't need to chase anyone. He's not a landlord. He's a billionaire. But this wasn't about money anymore. It was about principle. Inside the clause, what it actually demanded. Let's be specific. This secret clause, according to someone who claimed to have reviewed it, wasn't some cold corporate demand. It was straightforward. It stated, the occupants agree to reimburse all agreed-upon operating costs associated with security, property maintenance, and logistics no later than 90 days following termination of use. That's it. 90 days. That was the window. But guess how long it took for Perry's team to even hear anything back? 5 months. And when they did, it wasn't from Meghan or Harry. It was from a third-party legal representative asking for clarification. Clarification on a clause that had already been signed off on, verbally and in writing. At this point, Perry reportedly told his team, this is why I don't do favors without contracts anymore. Was it ever about the money? Here's where things get twisted. Perry didn't need repayment. He could have eaten the costs and walked away. But insiders say it wasn't about dollars. It was about disrespect. This was a man who had protected them, who took the hits from paparazzi, who rerouted his own life for their comfort, who kept their secrets. And when it came time for something as simple as honoring an agreement, he got stonewalled. And that's when it went from friendly tension to legal tension. And someone on Perry's legal team made a bold suggestion. Trigger the clause. Formally. Serve notice. Preserve documentation. And begin preparing for a potential breach of agreement claim. Why didn't the public know? Because Perry didn't want the drama. Not at first. He's been in this business too long. He knows how fast the media can twist a narrative. So his team worked quietly. They kept communication sealed. Legal memos were marked confidential. But one of those memos didn't stay confidential. And what it revealed shocked even Perry. Because it wasn't just that Meghan and Harry hadn't paid. It was that their representatives were now challenging the validity of the clause altogether, as if it never existed. Enter the email trail. And then came the leak. An assistant, no longer employed by one of the firms involved, allegedly sent an email to a contact in the real estate world. The subject line? Perry Estate, Sussex arrangement, legal gray area. That email began circulating in quiet corners of the LA entertainment scene, and what it outlined was damning. It stated that Meghan and Harry's legal team were reviewing whether the initial document constituted a binding agreement or informal hospitality, and whether any reimbursements were obligatory or discretionary. Perry saw it, and that was the final straw. He wasn't just being ghosted. He was being undermined. The fallout behind the gates. Here's what happened next, according to two individuals who worked within Perry's extended circle. Perry ordered all internal references to the Sussex stay scrubbed from his company's servers. He instructed his PR team to decline all future Sussex-related interviews, questions, or retrospectives. And most importantly, he called his real estate consultant and said two words: listed. Because to Perry, the mansion wasn't just a house anymore. It was a liability, a monument to a broken promise. And he wanted it gone. The repercussions we haven't seen yet. But here's what's even more fascinating. This clause. It may have been just one of several. There are rumors, still unconfirmed, that the agreement also included a non-disparagement clause. One that would prevent the Sussexes from ever mentioning details of their stay. One that could, in theory, be enforced if they ever go public about what really happened inside that Montecito mansion. And if they violate that clause? Let's just say Perry has a legal team that makes other studios look like interns. Because for all his warmth and philanthropy, Perry plays to win. And sources close to him say he's already drafted documents to prepare for a counterstrike, should the Sussexes ever try to retaliate. So far, they've kept quiet. But with media pressure rising, deals collapsing, and the couple needing a comeback story, how long until someone spills? And if they do, that clause becomes very real. The mansion was never just a home. It was a contract. Think about it. The house they stayed in. The property that launched their Hollywood debut. The safe space that birthed their reinvention. It wasn't just emotional shelter. It was legally binding terrain. And once that clause was triggered, it marked the end of the fairy tale. Because for Perry, the mansion was no longer part of his empire. It was a liability, a risk, and a reminder. But the part that really pushed him over the edge wasn't the money, wasn't even the legal gaslighting. It was what came next. A betrayal he never expected. And it came from someone very close to Meghan. 2 paragraphs, 1 email, and suddenly, Tyler Perry wanted out, immediately. Imagine giving someone the keys to your sanctuary. No strings attached, no press, no conditions, except trust. Now imagine learning that while you were protecting them from the outside world, they were discussing you behind closed doors, in writing. That's exactly what happened. And it was one email, one digital thread, that shifted everything. Not a dramatic confrontation. Not a phone call filled with screaming. Not a late-night betrayal caught on security camera. Just an email. Sent. Forwarded. Leaked. And once Perry saw it, he made a decision that stunned even his closest team. Get them out of my house. And get it on the market. Let's unpack what was really inside that message. Because it wasn't just offensive, it was strategic. And it revealed a side of the Sussex operation Perry never thought he'd see. The leak that was never meant to leak. Here's what we know. In the second week of June, well after Meghan and Harry had moved into their own estate, a routine administrative email was sent from a junior staffer inside a talent agency affiliated with Meghan's representation. The message wasn't addressed to Perry. It wasn't even about Perry directly. It was, on the surface, about logistics. But buried in the email was a comment that changed everything. The message had been forwarded internally, and a copy eventually made its way, accidentally or intentionally, to someone within Tyler Perry Studios' Business Affairs division. The subject line? Post-TPS transition notes, finalize comms. At first glance, nothing unusual. But then came a bullet point in the body of the email. Avoid referencing Tyler directly in any upcoming press. We don't want him pulled into potential reimbursements or residual optics. Also flag. House use still being negotiated. Stay vague. Still being negotiated. 3 words. 3 very dangerous words. Because to Perry's team, this line meant one thing. They were preparing a narrative. Not a thank you. Not a behind-the-scenes documentary tribute. A cover story. And possibly, a legal defense. Perry's reaction, calm, cold, calculated. When Perry read the email, there was no outburst. No drama. He simply turned to his head of legal and asked, "Do we still have everything in writing?" The answer? Yes. And that's when the mood shifted. He stood up, left the meeting room, and within the hour, his real estate advisor had a call scheduled. The message was crystal clear. Sell the house. Fast. Quietly. And don't let them know until it hits the listings. This wasn't about revenge. It was about control. Because Perry wasn't going to be a footnote in someone else's brand misfire. Not after what he'd done. Not after how they treated him. The residual optics, that backfired. Let's look at that email phrase again. Residual optics. It's corporate speak. A sanitized way of saying, we don't want Perry dragged into any mess, because it's going to get messy. Why would Meghan's team say that? What were they planning? According to a Hollywood communications expert who reviewed the language, the phrase suggests anticipation of backlash. In other words, they knew something might come out, and they were preparing to minimize it. This wasn't about innocent miscommunication. This was crisis control in advance. They weren't protecting Perry. They were protecting themselves. And Perry? He knew it. Because if the Sussexes were preparing to stay vague, it meant they were either rewriting history in case of scrutiny or bracing for a legal challenge over unpaid agreements. Either way, they weren't acting like friends. They were acting like clients in damage control mode. Internal fallout at Perry Studios. The email, though brief, sparked a full-blown investigation. Perry's internal legal team launched a file review. Every message, every signed agreement, every expense related to the Sussex stay was pulled and archived. His communications team issued a strict memo. No public comment on Meghan Markle, Prince Harry, or the Montecito property under any circumstances. Executives were told to prepare a media neutralization strategy in case the mansion sale attracted press questions. But here's where it gets interesting. Perry didn't want to fight. He wanted to erase. Sources say he instructed his digital branding division to scrub website references to the estate's hosting history, mentions of Meghan and Harry in internal newsletters, even a small segment in a behind-the-scenes company video that had a brief shot of the Sussex's security convoy. Gone. Cut. Erased. Why? Because Perry wanted no fingerprints. No association. Just distance. Total distance. Meghan's team, caught off guard. When the mansion went up for sale, the Sussexes weren't informed in advance. They found out like the rest of us, when the property quietly hit high-end listing platforms. But that wasn't the real gut punch. The real shock was the asking price, because Perry's team listed the home slightly under market value. Translation? He wasn't maximizing profit. He was offloading. And fast. This signaled urgency. And Meghan's team noticed. In fact, just hours after the listing went live, a private representative reached out to Perry's business manager, asking if they could arrange a private conversation to clarify ongoing matters. The reply? At this time, Mr. Perry has chosen to not re-engage on this topic. Ice cold. And then, the interview that never aired. Now here's where things almost exploded. According to a producer at a major streaming network, Meghan had been developing a light-hearted lifestyle segment for a behind-the-scenes project, something akin to a soft docuseries about her life after the palace. In one version of the concept deck, Perry's home was listed as the launch pad of her family's new chapter. There were even rough interview questions drafted that mentioned Tyler's generosity, safe spaces, and faith in people. But after the email leak, every mention of Perry was pulled, and the whole segment shelved. Because the team knew, if they name-checked him now, they could be hit with a response they weren't prepared for. Because now, Perry wasn't just a friend. He was a legal risk. So what was in that email that we haven't seen? Let's be clear, only fragments of the original email have circulated. But according to a second source, the draft thread may have included reference to press strategy, as in, which publications to leak select narratives to, how to frame the Montecito transition as self-funded, how to position Perry as a generous benefactor without implying financial dependence. In other words, they were plotting a PR rebrand, one that used Perry's name without his consent. And once Perry realized that his silence was being used as a shield, he shut the whole thing down. The email was the match, but there was already gasoline. Let's not kid ourselves. The damage had been building. Delayed reimbursements, back-channel negotiations, ghosted communications. Subtle reputation hits. The email? That was just the matchstick. The moment Perry realized, I'm not a friend in this story. I'm a character. And he didn't want to be written into their chapter anymore. He wanted out. Completely. Permanently. And once the mansion is sold, that chapter is officially over. But just as Perry was closing the book, he got wind of something even worse. A planned leak. A whisper campaign. One that involved a familiar name. And the moment Perry heard it, he knew the war had just begun. What happens when your $1 million deal turns into a $1 million embarrassment? That's the question Netflix executives were quietly asking themselves by the end of 2022. And when you consider the stakes, the money, the global attention, the political ramifications, the answer wasn't just about damage control. It was about reputation survival. Because Meghan and Harry weren't just Netflix's new content creators. They were supposed to be the crown jewels of the streaming giant's prestige lineup. A-list, global, controversial in all the right ways. Netflix banked on the Sussexes to deliver a media moment. But what they got was a PR landmine, an internal mutiny, and an awkward phone call to Tyler Perry. Yes, Tyler Perry. Because once Netflix saw the writing on the wall, they needed answers. And some execs believed Perry had them. Let's rewind. The deal that dazzled and derailed. When Netflix announced their multi-year, multi-million-dollar partnership with Meghan and Harry in 2020, the entertainment industry lit up like a Christmas tree. Nobody had ever landed royalty before. Not like this. Not for content creation. The deal, rumored to be worth anywhere between $75 million and $100 million, promised documentaries, docuseries, scripted content, and even children's shows. The Sussexes had just launched Archwell Productions, and Netflix was their golden gate. At least, that was the idea. But what unfolded next would become a masterclass in misalignment, missed deadlines, and media misfires. The first red flag, radio silence. For the first 12 months after the deal was inked, Archwell Productions delivered nothing. Zero content. Netflix, usually patient with creatives, grew nervous. Behind the scenes, execs requested timelines, proposals, pilot concepts. Instead, they got vague replies and repeated references to vision alignment and strategic pivots. Translation? The Sussexes didn't know what they wanted to make. Or worse, they knew, and Netflix didn't want it. By mid-2021, internal pressure mounted. One development exec allegedly wrote in a Slack message, "They're treating us like donors, not partners." Not a great sign. Then came Harry and Meghan, the 6-part gamble. It wasn't until late 2022 that Archwell finally delivered its first big project, Harry and Meghan, a 6-part docuseries chronicling their love story, royal departure, and media battles. The trailer alone garnered over 20 million views in 48 hours. Netflix was giddy, but once the series dropped, the excitement turned into something messier. Yes, it was watched. Yes, it trended globally. But critics tore it apart. Audiences were split. And the backlash? Brutal. From The Times to The Guardian, Rolling Stone to The Atlantic, pundits accused the couple of rewriting history, weaponizing victimhood, recycling footage, and worst of all, making themselves the heroes of every scene. Twitter was ablaze. TikTokers mocked it. Meme pages exploded. And Netflix? They got nervous. Because controversy was expected. But mockery? That's brand poison. The Pearl debacle. Before the docuseries even aired, Meghan had pitched another project. An animated children's show called Pearl, about a girl inspired by influential women in history. It had the makings of a prestige project. But in May 2022, months before the Harry and Meghan docuseries even premiered, Netflix canceled it. Quietly. No press tour. No fight. Just gone. Why? Budget cuts, they said. But insiders tell a different story. They claim Pearl was overstaffed, underdeveloped, and running behind. One insider described the project as a slow-moving vanity piece with no internal champion. And Netflix had seen enough. They cut it. Just like that. Where does Tyler Perry fit in? Now here's the twist you didn't see coming. Amid all this chaos, as Netflix struggled to salvage the Harry and Meghan partnership, a few key execs started asking around about the Sussexes' early development process. Specifically, who helped them behind the scenes. And all roads pointed to Tyler Perry. Not because he was involved in content creation. He wasn't. but because during their critical transitional period, when Meghan and Harry first moved to LA and started plotting their empire, they were living at Perry's house. Perry provided the security, space, and silence they needed to draft pitches and map ideas. So naturally, some Netflix people thought, maybe Perry knows more than we do. And so, according to one streaming executive, a quiet call was made. Not to confront, to inquire, to feel things out. But Perry didn't offer much. His response, "They're grown. I let them do what they needed to do." But even in that short reply, one thing became clear. He wasn't thrilled. And that subtle chill was noticed. Netflix's internal memo, reassessed Sussex strategy. By early 2023, Netflix circulated an internal memo titled Q1 Review, High-Value Partnerships. In it, Archewell was listed. Under Priority, Reassessment. The notes? Low volume output relative to cost. Brand volatility increasing. Audience fatigue observed. In plain English, Netflix was realizing what the public already suspected. The Sussex brand wasn't delivering, and it was becoming toxic. Executives even considered reducing promotional budgets for future Sussex projects, which, in streaming speak, is code for, "We're preparing to walk away." The phone call that changed everything. Now here's where it gets personal. In March 2023, following several PR disasters, including the Spotify cancellation and a poorly received United Nations speech, Netflix made another call. This time, directly to Perry's team. Their question? Would Mr. Perry be willing to consult on a restructuring strategy for Archewell's media wing? The answer? A flat no. Not "let's talk." Not "send the materials." Just, Mr. Perry is no longer involved with any initiatives connected to Archewell or the Sussexes. Boom. And within 2 weeks, the mansion was listed. Coincidence? Not a chance. Why did Netflix think Perry could help? Simple. Because Tyler Perry is a media mogul. He owns his own studio campus. He runs his own empire. He writes, directs, produces, and he does it profitably. And Netflix? They're desperate for profitable creators. So when they saw Meghan and Harry struggling, they reached for someone who knows how to turn brand volatility into brand power. But Perry wanted no part of it. Because by then, he'd seen too much. What Netflix is planning now? With the Perry connection iced out, Netflix has quietly shifted gears. A source close to internal strategy says the streamer is no longer pursuing unscripted Sussex content, demanding stronger production timelines for any new proposals, and preparing contingency plans if the partnership ends altogether. In fact, at least one development slate has been shelved until further notice. And Archewell? They're reportedly scrambling to keep the relationship afloat. But Netflix isn't a charity. It's a business. And right now, the Sussexes are trending in the wrong direction. The final blow, internal mockery. This might be the most damning detail yet. One producer claimed that an internal Netflix chat group, used by mid-level execs and coordinators, began jokingly referring to the Sussexes as the Highness headache. And worse, they started using Harry's name as a verb. Don't Harry this project. Translation? Don't overpromise, underdeliver, and expect us to fix it. That's not satire. That's scorn. And once a company starts mocking its talent internally, it's over. So where does this leave Perry and the mansion? When Perry saw how fast the media tides had turned and how Netflix, the Sussex's biggest partner, was now hesitating, he knew the house had to go, the associations had to end, and any lingering involvement? Scrubbed. Because Perry wasn't just watching a deal collapse. He was watching a brand sink. And Perry doesn't cling to sinking ships. But just as Perry was reclaiming peace, a neighbor stepped forward with a story. A story Perry hoped would never get out. A story that involved cameras, a trespassing incident, and someone connected directly to the Sussexes' inner circle. And what that neighbor revealed would make headlines around the world. What happens when privacy turns into a spectacle? When neighbors become witnesses, and sometimes judges. Montecito is famous for two things: luxury estates tucked behind lush greenery and residents who guard their privacy with nearly religious zeal. It's a community where A-list stars live under the radar, where drone sightings are tracked, and where gossip is whispered, never shouted. Until Prince Harry and Meghan Markle arrived. Suddenly, the invisible boundaries were shattered. The Sussexes weren't just celebrities. They were ex-royals with a media circus attached, a legal and PR entourage, and a constant stream of curiosity seekers. They weren't moving quietly. They were establishing a Hollywood LA royal camp in Perry's Montecito sanctuary, and neighbors began to notice. And when neighbors notice, stories emerge. The first signs of friction. The initial months were subtle. A blacked-out SUV at 5 a.m. Private security walking gates in full tactical gear. A mysterious drone hovering in a tree lane. These were minor annoyances to begin with, but over time, the presence grew. One neighbor, who wished to remain anonymous, told an entertainment outlet, "We didn't want to be rude, but it was clear they were different from anyone who had lived here." The media, the security, it was nonstop. Tyler's home became a fortress, but we could see it. We could hear it. Small talk at the local coffee shop, another neighbor said, turned into discussions about how long the royals would stay and whether Tyler Perry knew what he was letting into his home. The narrative started to shift. Perry's generosity, once applauded in private circles, was suddenly under scrutiny by those living in earshot. Security concerns escalate. Beyond gossip, there were legitimate security concerns. According to a local security consultant, the Sussex's presence increased patrols and complicated neighborhood protocols. Drones flying overhead were intercepted by Perry's private team, yet the anxiety remained. Delivery drivers were refused entry. Contractors were checked 3 times. Even regular staff at neighboring estates reported being stopped by security just to walk down familiar driveways. A former Montecito police liaison commented, "The level of security was unparalleled for a private residence. And it wasn't just about safety, it was the optics. People wanted to see, understand, and report. The more attention the security drew, the more attention they generated, a classic case of trying to maintain secrecy while attracting curiosity. The media swarms. Word spread fast in Montecito. By mid-2021, photographers were staking out Perry's mansion, hoping to capture a glimpse of the ex-royals. Helicopters hovered, drones hovered, and Instagram influencers somehow found their way into restricted zones. Neighbors became intermediaries, sometimes intentionally, sometimes unwittingly. They observed unusual patterns, made mental notes, and some even began documenting the comings and goings on their own. One neighbor, who later became a source for gossip columns, noted, "We didn't sign up for a circus." But you can't ignore when your driveway is surrounded by black SUVs, cameras, and someone trying to deliver a package at 6 a.m. It became clear that the Sussex's quiet refuge was turning into a spectacle, and Tyler Perry, for all his discretion, was at the center of it by association. Incidents that raised eyebrows. As months passed, incidents began trickling into neighborhood anecdotes. A delivery driver reported being held at the gate for over an hour despite pre-approved authorization. A dog walker spotted what appeared to be unauthorized aerial photography of the property. Multiple neighbors claimed to see private security shadowing uninvited visitors, even when no threat existed. While none of these incidents made mainstream headlines, they contributed to an undercurrent of tension. Montecito, normally a haven of discreet celebrity living, was quietly in upheaval. Neighbor gossip and leaks. Inevitably, gossip became more than whispers. One neighbor allegedly documented events and shared them with a private real estate insider. According to sources, the shared information included timestamps of security vehicle arrivals and departures, number of staff present, and even subtle notes about conversations overheard during outdoor visits. The email chain eventually made its way to media outlets, providing context for a narrative the public would only see months later. Perry's mansion wasn't just a safe space. It was a hub of constant activity, drama, and tension. Neighbors were unwittingly narrating the rise and fall of a media experiment. The impact on Perry. All of this, noise, leaks, surveillance, neighbor whispers, added to Tyler Perry's growing unease. He hadn't intended to be a subject of headlines or to have his private estate scrutinized by third parties. He'd merely offered sanctuary. The attention also complicated his own brand. Perry is known for keeping control of his narrative. He crafts stories. He directs. He edits. He doesn't let external forces control the frame. But now, his estate was at the center of a real-life story he didn't script. And worse, The narrative painted him as complicit in a rising chaos he had been quietly trying to manage. Neighbors as observers and witnesses. The most compelling accounts came from those who actively observed rather than gossipers. A retired Montecito judge, also a neighbor, reportedly documented the Sussexes' extended stays. Notes included number of security personnel, times of guests arriving, and the presence of media vans outside the property. The implication? Even in what was meant to be a private haven, the Sussexes could not escape scrutiny. Every step they took was being noted, cataloged, and, eventually, leaked. It wasn't paparazzi. It wasn't Netflix cameras. It was the eyes of the community. And that's when Perry realized the sanctuary was compromised. The breaking point. Sources claim Perry's breaking point came during a seemingly minor but symbolic incident. A private drone hovering near the property that he did not authorize. Security teams tracked the drone. A report was filed. But neighbors began sharing screenshots and timestamps publicly, some innocuous, some malicious. Perry reportedly called his security chief. "If this is going to be public, I'm done. We're listing the property." The mansion was no longer a refuge. It was a liability. And once the property was officially listed, neighbors confirmed they began receiving calls from curious buyers and media seeking statements. Perry, for the first time, was forced to publicly manage an exit strategy without the safety of private negotiation. Mini cliffhanger. Just when Tyler Perry thought he could reclaim control by selling the mansion quietly, a neighbor stepped forward with surveillance footage. Footage that suggested someone connected to the Sussex inner circle had been entering the property after their departure. Unauthorized, unexpected, and potentially explosive. The revelation threatened to ignite a story that could spiral well beyond a simple real estate sale. What happens when your friends disappear faster than your bank account? For Meghan Markle, Hollywood was supposed to be the land of reinvention. A place where past scripts, past headlines, and past royal baggage could be rewritten into her own narrative. And for a time, it worked. She had access to the elite. Oprah Winfrey, Tyler Perry, George Clooney, Ellen DeGeneres. Networks and studios that would bend, sometimes literally, to accommodate her. She had deals, visibility, and connections. Everything a former actress and now ex-royal could dream of. But by late 2022, cracks began to appear in that glittering network. And the mansion Perry had once provided? It became a symbol of both opportunity and isolation. The first cracks, subtle withdrawals. At first, the cracks were almost invisible. Calls returned later than usual. Invitations to private dinners diminished. Mentors began passing on introductions quietly. A Hollywood insider noted. It wasn't overt. It was subtle. The elite circle was shrinking around Meghan without any dramatic breakups, just fading interest. It's the kind of slow erosion that's worse than a public feud. You don't see it coming until suddenly, you're standing alone in a room you thought was full of allies. And by early 2023, that room was noticeably empty. Oprah's quiet retreat. Perhaps the most shocking shift came from Oprah Winfrey. The queen of daytime and late-night influence had been a staunch supporter of the Sussexes. She introduced them to Perry. She hosted interviews. She even publicly praised their philanthropic work. But behind the cameras, sources suggest Oprah began distancing herself. Allegedly, she became frustrated with constant delays, canceled projects, and repeated PR misfires. Meetings were postponed. Calls weren't returned. And subtle messages from her team suggested she was no longer willing to advocate on Meghan's behalf in Hollywood circles. One insider said, Oprah gave them a lot of rope. But there's a limit. When a brand becomes unpredictable, even your biggest supporters pull back. And Meghan felt it. The silence wasn't loud, it was deafening. Tyler Perry's disengagement. Then there was Tyler Perry, whose generosity had once seemed boundless. While he remained private and careful, insiders say Perry became increasingly frustrated with the Sussexes' inconsistent approach to deals. Missed deadlines, unrealistic demands, public misstatements that risked his own reputation. The mansion sale wasn't just about property. It was about distancing himself from a partnership that no longer served him financially or socially. Perry's network of executives and creatives was watching. He had to make a statement. And quietly, through listing the property, he did. Hollywood politics and waning support. Hollywood thrives on alliances, and the Sussexes' sudden rise had initially seemed unstoppable. Yet several factors contributed to the weakening of their network. Unpredictability. Studios hate uncertainty. When content deadlines aren't met, projects are shelved. Brand fatigue. The constant media coverage of Meghan and Harry's personal lives caused some supporters to distance themselves. PR misfires, social media controversies, missteps, and the perception of financial mismanagement eroded confidence. Even people once described as friends for life started to reassess. And as those connections faded, Meghan's Hollywood influence dwindled. The domino effect.